7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
World War II was only 8 months old when the battleship USS Iowa was launched at the New York Navy Yard on August 27, 1942. Vice President Henry Wallace's wife, Ilo, christened the ship along with a throng of spectators, media, and 30,000 shipyard workers. The Wallaces were originally from the state of Iowa. "I christen thee Iowa," said Mrs. Wallace as she swung a metal-encased champagne bottle against the ship's bow. "May God guard thee Iowa and all who sail in her."
The first of a new class of 45,000-ton battleships is ready for launching. Mrs. Wallace, wife of the Vice President, christens the United States ship Iowa, heaviest and best armed man of war ever built.
The USS Iowa, nicknamed the Big Stick, was called the greatest ship ever launched by the American nation by Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox in 1942. The Iowa's combined deck area equaled 9 acres. Her 250 miles of electrical cable supported an electrical system that could handle the industrial and domestic load of a city of 20,000 people. Not only was the Iowa the most modern of her day, but she was also the only battleship with a bathtub and an elevator. The ship also was sometimes called the Armored Oiler because she could carry 2,400,000 gallons of fuel and refuel destroyers and frigates at sea. The Iowa, named after and supported by the state of Iowa, is one of 49 battleships the United States has built since 1893. The Iowa, the greatest fighting ship of its time, also is the name of a class of battleships including the New Jersey, Missouri, and Wisconsin. The Iowas were faster than previous battleships and able to stay with aircraft carrier task forces in World War II. Their anti-aircraft firepower ensured carriers were not sunk. The Iowa's 16-inch guns fire projectiles weighing from 1,900 to 2,700 pounds.
Stand by! Stand by! Go!
The accuracy of those guns, we sunk one ship at about 23.5 miles on the first salvo. We went over to pick up the survivors, but there was nothing there. And that was hoisting a 2,700-pound projectile.
The original main armament of the Iowa consisted of 9 16-inch 50 caliber guns and the secondary armament of 20 5-inch 38 caliber guns. The large caliber guns were designed to fire 2 different shells: armor-piercing rounds for anti-ship and anti-structure work, and high explosive rounds designed for use against unarmored targets and shore bombardment. The 16-inch guns are 66 feet long with 43 feet protruding from the turret.
We sank some ships. One of them, which is I think has to be a record, we sank a destroyer somewhere between 23 to 25 miles away. It was way over the horizon. We didn't see it. The radar, we still had it on radar. And so the admiral said, well, let them have it. And so we fired all 9 guns at one time, and the ship disappeared off the radar. They sent airplanes out there to find it. It was not there. we'd sank it that great distance by radar.
Sir, yes, sir!
On February 22, 1943, Commanding Officer Captain John L. McCrae took charge of the battleship USS Iowa.
Captain McCrae was a very, very strict captain of the ship. He made us tote the mark. We were young kids, and he was like a father to us. Any crew member from World War II would tell you that we would do anything for him because he would do anything for us. If you did something wrong, you got heck, and I mean heck. And he reprimanded you, but he meant it, and he made men out of us kids.
Captain McCrae was an excellent person to work with. We stood watch with him at the battle station. His battle station was in our tower where we had the wheel to keep the ship on course. So, and he was also a very good friend of President Roosevelt, having served with him back in the late teens when Roosevelt was Secretary of the Navy. So they were old friends. And I think that's another reason that we got the honor to carry President Roosevelt across the ocean.
We had about 4 captains in my tour of duty aboard the Iowa, and I would rate him as the best. He was a strict captain, and he told us if you want a good ship, you got to have a disciplined ship and a clean ship, and we sure did.
That summer, the Iowa began her World War II service en route to Newfoundland and the North Atlantic for her first war patrol. Her assignment was to keep watch on the German battleship Tirpitz, thereby contributing to the neutralization of the threat presented by that warship then poised in Norwegian waters. The Iowa continued with its operations in the Atlantic and prepared to go to the Pacific Theater of Operations. The USS Iowa would play host to President Franklin Roosevelt and major military staff in a joint meeting with the leader of Russia and the Prime Minister of Great Britain. The meeting was to take place in Tehran, Iran, and was one of the most significant conferences of the nations. President Roosevelt required certain bathing and living conditions as he had suffered from polio, which had rendered him unable to walk or even stand. A large square porcelain bathtub with stainless steel railings was built in the quarters normally reserved for a fleet commander or battleship division commander. It was and is the only bathtub aboard any warship in the U.S. Navy.
When we took President Roosevelt over to Tehran on his way back, he come across on a boatswain's chair from the French destroyer USS Giselle, and I had the opportunity to be one of his aides because our first-class petty officer, Melvin Pearson, was off the USS Northampton, which happened to be my hometown in Massachusetts. And he picked me and another fellow from Mount Union, Ohio, I forget his name, and we had the opportunity to be standing on deck when President Roosevelt came off on a boatswain's chair. And both of us picked him up, set him on the wheelchair, then we pushed President Roosevelt to the elevator. But before that, when I first met the president, when he come on board the ship, I never was so excited in my life to be able to meet a president of the United States or any high official.
I did not call him by his name. I said, President, I saluted him because I was in uniform. And he was our commander-in-chief. I addressed him like that.
At Cairo and Tehran, we devoted ourselves not only to military matters, we devoted ourselves also to consideration of the future, to plans for the kind of world which alone can justify all the sacrifices of this war.
President Roosevelt embarked with Joint Chiefs of Staff in November 1943 and disembarked at Chesapeake Bay on December 16, 1943. The President's final words to the crew before disembarking the USS Iowa were, "Good luck, and remember that I am with you in spirit, each and every one of you." The USS William D. Porter, or Willie D. as she was called, accidentally fired a live torpedo at the USS Iowa on November 14, 1943 during a practice exercise. During this time, the Iowa was carrying President Roosevelt, the Secretary of State, and all of the World War II U.S. military brass to the Big Three Conference. Had the torpedo struck the Iowa at the aiming point, the last several decades of world history may have been quite different. Fortunately, the warning from the Willie D. caused the Iowa to evade the speeding torpedo.
My goodness, did the Germans find out we're taking President Roosevelt across the Atlantic? And he gave an order of right flank 90 degrees to get parallel with the next torpedo if there was another one coming. Well, they finally found out it was a torpedo from the USS Porter. They were practicing and they let a live one go.
Vicky, short for Victory, was actually a male dog. He was the first Iowa commander's dog who joined the ship in 1943 and logged more than 200,000 miles at sea. He quickly became the ship mascot and even befriended President Franklin Roosevelt on the president's trip across the Atlantic.
Our mascot was Captain McCrae's dog. The only place the dog would go was on next to the captain's promenade deck. And the only ones that ever took care of him was the Marines. And we never knew if it was male or female.
Well, Vicky the dog was the ship's mascot. It ran all over the ship where it wanted to go. Everybody fed her. And if it did anything on the deck or anywhere else, whoever was there cleaned it up, that's all. It was a very nice dog. I had very little to do with it. If I happened to be on deck and she was around, I used to pet it, but that was it.
Down. Over there. And a push-up blow out down.
Pepsi-Cola hit the spot. 12 full ounces, that's a lot. Twice as much for a nickel too. Pepsi-Cola.
What we look forward to, mainly we would be on operations probably for 30 to 60 to 80 days at a time, where you wouldn't get supplies, or you wouldn't get occasionally you would get mail from home, and that would be a good thing, like we would go back into a port for an area like Enewetak or some of the islands where you'd rendezvous with the freighters and supply ships, and you'd look forward to that time. But other than that, it was just, you were in almost semi-battle conditions where you had to be aware of what was going on.
On January 2nd, 1944, the Iowa headed toward the Panama Canal and westward to where the Japanese were making one last-ditch stand after another in their crusade to stop the Allied island-hopping strategy toward their homeland. The Iowa was appointed flagship of the Battleship Division 7, and its next stop was the Marshall Islands. The ship's primary assignment was to support the fast carriers as they made airstrikes on various Japanese bases from Kwajalein to Truk in early 1944. Life magazine featured the USS Iowa with a cover story on October 30th, 1944. The story was called Iowa's First Port. Super Battleship is biggest ship of the big. A section read, "This week the public got its first look at the ship, which carries more of this strength in one hull than any other naval vessel." The country was jubilant when the Japanese surrendered. U.S. and British fleets in Tokyo Bay witnessed the surrender ceremonies on September 2nd, 1945.
After the surrender had been signed, and these Japanese officials were in the process of disembarking, and all of a sudden, I think every aircraft carrier in the area had launched their planes, and there was just waves of these American aircraft flying over, and these Japanese stood and they were amazed. And it was just, you think, this is really a good climax to this whole operation, you know.
With the coming of peace, the Navy evidently had difficulty figuring out what to do with the Iowa. She stayed in Japanese waters for barely a month. Then she returned to Long Beach via Seattle. By January 1946, however, she was back in Tokyo Bay as flagship of the 5th Fleet. The Iowa then returned home in April 1946, and for the next 2 years, she served as a Naval Reserve training vessel, acting as a floating classroom for midshipmen from the Naval Academy and Reserve personnel. The USS Iowa was finally decommissioned on the 24th of March, 1949. The battleship might have been scrapped had it not been for the Korean conflict. Critics at the time argued that battleships were obsolete, but they did not know that the Iowa was reactivated as a nuclear arsenal. Rear Admiral Lewis Smith Parks, former commander of the battleship Cruiser Force in 1953, revealed that both these ships, the Wisconsin and the Iowa, had in their magazines and were capable of firing atomic projectiles of about the same power as the bombs which destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Such was the ship that Congress recommissioned under Captain William Smedberg on the 25th of August, 1951.
My fellow citizens, at noon today, I sent a message to the Congress about the situation in Korea. We have sent land, sea, and air forces to assist in these operations.
Again, the Iowa sailed through the Panama Canal.
The Panama Canal was 109 feet wide, and our ship was 108 feet wide. So he didn't want to scrape the sides on the locks. All the deck people were standing there holding these ropes. That big ship hit the cement locks, and everybody was holding stubs. So the next thing, we got to the eastern side of the Panama Canal, and it was storming. And he made all the deck force personnel over the side, paint the side of the ship, so we wouldn't look bad coming in to Norfolk, where we were going to go.
During the 1950s, special friendships were made among crew members that last a lifetime.
I had good times. Very few times that I had any sad times aboard the USS Iowa. It was like a family, and it was broken down. For example, in the OI division, we were like a family. Our duties were port and starboard duties, 12 on, 12 off. And you get to know those people as well, and you get to depend on them as they do you as well. And the fact of the matter is those people that I was on there for the short time that I was on the IOWA, we still, those that are not deceased, we still communicate, we still stay in that touch with each other and that type thing.
In the operations department, we had a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant Sam Gravely. Sam was a great man. Sorry. Sam was a black guy who was a lieutenant. And he later became the first black admiral in the United States Navy, in the Sixth Fleet. He just passed away about 5 years ago. And we had a lot of good times. He was a good man. That's the defining part in my career there.
At first I thought it was funny. Really, after we had been recommissioned and shakedown cruisers and so forth, we went to Long Beach one time and picked up a load of recruits. Because I wasn't much more than a recruit, a year or so in the Navy, a little over a year. But these recruits was my first time to be introduced to somebody new like that coming aboard. And quite a few of them got seasick. That's not funny in itself, but the thing I thought, they stayed topside and regurgitated and so forth for, it was a week on our way to Hawaii, I think it was, and they hung over the lifelines for that solid week. Well, fire the big guns, the 16-inch 50 guns on the battleship is something special. We spent, I don't know how many months, drills and cleaning and working and getting them in shape. I mean, like you told us, we don't want you to act, we want you to react. So when general quarters is sounded, you do your job and don't worry about anything else. But those big 16-inch guns, it takes about 90 people, it did in Korea, to operate that turret. It starts at the bottom with the powder magazines, goes up to a shell deck, and has the shells, and then those hoists bring it up to a gun rooms, 3 gun rooms. And that's a procedure that is something special in itself. In each separate gun room, and those 3 16-inch guns, there's a gun captain, a rammer, and a gun captain in that little room set off separate from the others. And they bring up the shell in a shell hoist. It drops over a hydraulic hoist and goes into the barrel and is seated. And then they follow it with 600-pound bags of powder. Can you imagine 600 pounds of powder to fire one shell? And we could fire that shell over 20 miles and drop it on your house if need be, you know.
The technology was pretty amazing when you consider how accurate those 16-inch guns were, and as a matter of fact, how accurate they are now. If there was some way to put that ship back into service and fire some of the rounds so you could prove to a lot of people that don't believe that we can shoot a 16-inch shell, which is about 5 feet high, 16 inches in diameter, weighing about 2,700 pounds, that we could fire that thing 23 miles, and that would be accurate. I mean, we could zone in on a target and destroy it.
The Korean conflict, however, was not a serious naval war. The Iowa became the flagship for the 7th Fleet under Vice Admiral Robert Briscoe and later Vice Admiral J.J. Jocko Clark. The latter led a mock amphibious assault on Kojo in hopes of exposing the enemy, but he failed in his objective and thus helped convince the military establishment that the Korean conflict was no war for a ship like the Iowa. Shortly after the Kojo operation, the battleship was ordered to Norfolk, Virginia for overhaul.
It's like a member of your family, I think, if you've spent time and good time aboard, a ship like that. And I have talked to my grandkids through the years. And I think they understand. Excuse me. And part of what you did, was for them. And I think my grandkids understand that. Coming from me.
So, from time to time during my tour on that ship, there were a lot of VIPs that came aboard the ship, admirals. There were movie stars. Even when we came back to the States in '54. We went to New York, and I remember we were tied up at a pier in New York City, and one of the big events was having the Ed Sullivan show on the afterdeck, and it was televised and transmitted to all of the homes in the country.
Presents Ed Sullivan, the nationally syndicated columnist of the New York Daily News, and his toast of the town. One of the highlights of New York's Summer Festival is the visit to New York Harbor of the Big I, the USS Iowa. Tonight, all of our Toast of the Town cast is aboard. We'll bring you aboard by proxy and by reason of your television viewing. And here we are for tonight's Gala Toast of the Town. And here beneath turret number 3 is your master of ceremonies, Ed Sullivan.
Well, as you can imagine, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very exciting experience aboard the giant USS Iowa out here in the Hudson River in New York. And we're going to open up our show tonight aboard Captain Loud's proud ship with a George M. Cohan medley in which Dolores Gray, who is quite nervous, making her first appearance on the deck of a battleship, is going to kick off with Yankee Doodle Dandy. So let's have a big hand for Dolores Gray.
After 2.5 decades in mothballs, Iowa was modernized under the 1980s defense buildup and recommissioned in April 1984.
The Iowa class battleship was put back into commission because we were in competition with the Soviet Union at the time. They had a very large and powerful Navy, and we were trying to offset that Navy with surface assets of our own that had the capability to combat their very powerful ships. And at the time, the battleship was the best one available to bring into service quickly with long-range guns, updated with missiles, surface-to-surface missiles, and Harpoon and Tomahawk missiles. And so we could not only put it into commission quickly because it had been in mothballs and was in good condition, but it was also such a survivable ship. The armor was so thick that it was our view that these ships could go out and compete with the Soviets, get in combat with them if they had to, and When?
Every one of us in the 80s crew went to the Iowa, or any of us went to the battleship because of her history, because of the legacy of a battleship. It was a pride. You wanted to be on the best. And at the time, during President Reagan's 600-ship Navy, the battleships were the best.
The Iowa was about 300 miles from Puerto Rico. Tragedy struck that rocked the entire nation to its core. The USS Iowa turret explosion occurred in the number 2 16-inch gun turret on April 19, 1989.
Says 47 sailors are dead and at least a dozen injured after explosion and fire consumed the number 2 gun turret on the forward deck. The Iowa saw combat in both World War II and Korea. This is the first time that lives have ever been lost since she was launched 47 years ago.
I left the Iowa in late April of '88, and the turret accident happened April 19th of '89. But I lost some good friends. Sorry. But they're on our memorial plaque in Norfolk on the naval station.
2 major investigations were undertaken, one by the Navy and then one by General Accounting Office, working in conjunction with the Sandia National Laboratories.
Usually when the guns fired, the ship would, as a whipping motion, sideways. This bounced up and down. You could hear metal clattering. I opened the division officer's door and the passageway was already being filled with smoke. The general announcing system, the loudspeakers started blaring saying unknown detonation, turret 2. General quarters, all hands man your battle station. I was scared. Not so much, stark raving terror, but just concerned, are we going to make it out of this? How bad is it? For about the first 15 minutes, we really didn't know whether it was going to continue. And I lost 2 of my electricians that morning. I was the leading petty officer of E Division. I was the senior first-class electrician. 2 of my electricians were killed. I almost lost another electrician down there that morning. His name was Andy Rosario. He's from New York. Electrician made 2nd class. A can of Coke saved him. He decided to come up out of the turret, take a break, and go get a can of Coke. That short walk down the passageway to the Coke machine saved Andy's life.
I remember that day like it was yesterday. I relived that day just about every day. I was in my fire room at the time of the explosion, and I remember thinking I heard somebody call my name. So I turned my head and I happened to look at an electrical box, and I thought I saw a puff of smoke come out. I thought we were going to have an electrical fire, so I got ready to say something, and then I knew we were going to fire the guns that day. I just heard an explosion. It just didn't sound right. Right after that, it didn't feel right, and right after that they called general quarters, and the ship went into what they pretty much is a lockdown, and we continued to fight the fight. We went to fight our fires and save our ship. I saw a lot of fire, saw a lot of flames, but I lost a lot of friends that day.
Later on that day, they were looking for volunteers for the body removal, and they wanted the older generation who probably seen action, but they asked for volunteers, and I volunteered, and deep inside I wish I didn't. Because that's when I started seeing the true horror that was inside of it. The one that sticks in my mind, I helped remove the body from the center hoist operator. I still can't get that out of my mind. And we finally got him out. He was placed in a body bag. And he was taken there by somebody else to the aft mess decks, but the forward section. And there was one other body that we helped load up. I couldn't tell who they were. Officer, enlisted, a friend, or somebody just barely knew.
I heard, we were talking and we heard somebody crying. And right up above us, a couple of decks, was Captain Masali. And I never thought I would see, I didn't think captains were human. I thought they were just robots, that they had their job to do and that was it. They didn't have any feelings. He was crying. And it just meant to me that he knew what was ahead for him. He knew that he had to let the families know that their sons weren't coming back. And that's a side of him I never thought I'd see. He was a football player at the academy. He's a big, husky guy, tough as nails. But that one time I saw him, he was crying like a baby. And it hit home. Made me realize that everybody is human.
In August 1991, Sandia and the General Accounting Office completed their reports, concluding that the explosion was likely caused by an accidental overram of powder bags into the breech of the 16-inch gun. The Navy, however, disagreed with Sandia's opinion and concluded that the cause of the explosion could not be determined.
It's unfortunate that they never found the real cause of the accident, and to this day we still don't know what happened. And it's too bad that happened. I don't know professionally what really did happen, but it could be the gunpowder. The gunpowder that they were using was really old. It was stored on the York River in Virginia on barges, and that could have been a factor to it. The temperature inside the barges reached very high temperatures because it was in the summertime when it was stored on there. So that could have affected the gunpowder itself. But I do not think that it was any kind of sabotage or any certain individual made this explosion happen.
Bravery, along with a keen desire to serve their country, is something all veterans of the battleship USS Iowa had in common.
It was the easiest job I ever had. It doesn't sound like it should be, but on a ship like that, first of all, every man aboard was a volunteer. Not only volunteered for the armed services, but in the Navy, but they volunteered for that ship. They really wanted to be there. There was something special about being on a battleship that you couldn't get by being a member of a crew of any other ship. So we were very fortunate in that we didn't have lots of people who were we didn't have people who caused trouble. They were anxious to do the job. They were proud to do the job. And we had 1,500 enlisted personnel and 75 officers, and they were the best people to work with that I've ever had in my naval career. So it's just a matter of telling them, letting them know what it is that you expected, what you wanted them to do, and then get out of their way and let them do it. And trust that they will, in fact, do a good job, because they want to do a good job. All they need is a little bit of guidance to get them pointed in the right direction, and they'll perform. And we had no problems at all. They were the greatest crew I ever had.
Batteries releasing. 2, 1, shoot.
Living life on the sea gave each crew member the opportunity to perform a duty, practice discipline, work, play, experience happy times, and perhaps face sad times. But there were memories made and friendships never to be forgotten. Through tragedy, the Iowa has carried her crew through 3 eras, almost 70 years, of the most historic times of the world. Instead of the scrap heap, the USS Iowa is spared and is now a museum located at the Los Angeles, California waterfront.
Well, once a battleship sailor, you're always a battleship sailor. That's all there is to it. Because you're serving aboard we served aboard one of the greatest ships ever built.
A sailor has a special love for a ship. And I think that carries on all of his life.
But yeah, it was an exciting thing for a young kid from a mining town to go aboard a ship for the first time in his life. And so anyway, that trip back to visit my ship, and a lot of people kid me for saying my ship, but I think everybody that served aboard that ship says that was my ship.